Brody Duskin didn't recognize authority unless it came wrapped in a corner office and a company polo 2 shades cleaner than everyone else's. So when a broad-shouldered black man in a faded canvas jacket and steel-toe boots that had clearly seen 15 years of pavement walked through the employee entrance of the Iron Bridge Distribution Center at 5:52 that morning, he saw a problem standing in his aisle. Who let you back here? The man didn't flinch. I'm here for the operations walkthrough. I have clearance. Duskin said the word like it tasted bad. You got a badge? A name on the schedule? Or you just wandered in off the street looking for the day labor pickup? Because that's 2 blocks down. 4 dock workers stood 20 feet away, pretending to check pallet counts, listening to every word. The man didn't raise his voice. I have every right to be in this building. That's when Duskin grabbed his jacket collar and shoved him backward into a steel shelving unit hard enough to knock 3 cases of bottled water onto the concrete. The crash echoed through the whole receiving bay. Get your ass out of my dock before I have you arrested for trespassing. The man straightened his jacket, said nothing, and walked out through the same door he'd come in. Duskin turned to the workers still frozen by their pallet jacks. Show's over. Back to work. He had no idea that the man he'd just thrown into a shelving unit was about to become his boss. And he had even less idea that somebody in that receiving bay had just recorded the entire thing on a phone tucked behind a stack of invoices. To understand what really happened that morning, you have to go back 3 weeks, to a corporate boardroom 200 miles away, where a woman named Diane Castellano was staring at a compliance report she couldn't stop rereading. Diane Castellano was the chief operations officer of Iron Bridge Freight and Logistics, a mid-sized truck king and distribution company that had built its name on reliability and had spent the last 18 months quietly losing it. The Millbrook, Ohio Distribution Center, their second largest hub in the Midwest, had racked up 11 formal harassment complaints in 2 years. Workers' comp claims involving supervisor conduct were up 60%. 2 separate OSHA inspections had flagged hostile management practices, without naming names, because nobody at the facility would go on record. The plant manager, a man named Milton Cray, who'd run the place for 11 years, had quietly submitted his retirement paperwork the week the second inspection report landed and left before the ink dried. Corporate needed someone to walk into Millbrook, figure out exactly what was rotting the place from the inside, and fix it without triggering a wrongful termination lawsuit or a union walkout. Diane needed someone who understood logistics operations at the floor level, who had no history with anyone at that facility, and who had the stomach to watch bad behavior happen in real time instead of just reading about it in a spreadsheet. She found Malik Sterling. Malik was 49 years old, a 22-year veteran of freight operations who'd worked his way up from a forklift driver in Cleveland to a regional operations director in Atlanta. He had a graduate certificate in supply chain management from Ohio State, a reputation for turning around failing distribution centers, and, more importantly to Diane, a background in labor relations investigations from a stint with a national retailer where he'd cleaned up 2 facilities flagged for discriminatory scheduling practices. Diane had one condition when she offered him the Millbrook job. I don't want you walking in there as the new VP on day 1, she told him over the phone. I want you to walk in as a nobody. See how they treat people when they think nobody with power is watching. That's why Malik showed up that morning in an old canvas jacket instead of a suit, driving his own 15-year-old pickup instead of a rental, parking in the general employee lot instead of the reserved spaces up front. He walked in through the dock entrance instead of the front office, carrying nothing but a clipboard he'd borrowed from his hotel room desk and a folded copy of his appointment letter tucked into his jacket pocket. Every detail was deliberate. He wasn't visiting the facility, he was testing it. The only person at Iron Bridge who knew Malik was coming was Milton Cray, the outgoing plant manager, who was supposed to meet him at the dock entrance and walk him through a quiet introduction before anyone else arrived. Cray never showed. He rolled in almost 2 hours late, mumbling something about car trouble. At the time, it looked like bad luck. Later, it would look like something else entirely. Brody Duskin had been the dock shift supervisor at Ironbridge for 9 years. He had 4 separate complaints in his personnel file. 2 for verbal abuse, 1 for a shoving incident with a temp worker, 1 for retaliating against an employee who'd requested a schedule accommodation. Every single one had been closed as unsubstantiated. Duskin wasn't just aggressive, he was protected. The man protecting him was Dennis Holloway, the assistant plant manager who'd supervised the dock floor for 14 years. Every complaint against Duskin crossed Holloway's desk first, and every complaint against Duskin disappeared from Holloway's desk within days, filed away as resolved. No further action. Holloway and Duskin had grown up 2 streets apart in the same part of town, played on the same rec league softball team for a decade, and trusted each other in the specific way men trust each other when they've spent years covering for the same mistakes. Duskin had a shadow, too. A junior supervisor named Cody Munn, 26 years old, eager to move up and willing to laugh at anything, Duskin said, if it meant staying in his good graces. Munn didn't give the orders. He just stood close enough to make sure everyone knew whose side he was on. Together, the 3 of them had built something that had worked for years. Duskin acted, Munn backed him up, Holloway made it disappear. Nobody had ever pushed back hard enough to break it. The night before his first day, Malik sat in a motel room off the interstate and called his daughter, Maya, a sophomore at Kent State. She could hear something in his voice. "You sound tired, Dad." "I'm not tired," he said. "I'm just tired of proving I belong in rooms I already built." After they hung up, he opened the folder Diane had given him. His appointment letter, signed and notarized, the org chart showing his name at the top of Millbrook operations. Effective the following Monday, read it once and set it on the nightstand. He had no idea what the next morning would bring, but in a way, 22 years in this industry had been preparing him for exactly this. He found out in less than 4 minutes. What happened in that receiving bay wasn't the whole story. It was the highlight reel. To understand what actually happened, minute by minute, you need to go back to 5:47 a.m., when Malik pulled his truck into the general lot and killed the engine. He sat there for a moment, watching. He wanted to see the shift change before anyone knew he was watching it. Workers trickled in through the dock door in 2s and 3s, badges swiping, nobody greeting the security guard at the gate booth by name. The guard, a heavy-set older woman named Doris Kellerman, who'd worked that booth for 11 years, barely looked up from her phone as people passed. Malik walked toward the dock entrance at 5:51. He wanted to observe the floor before the day supervisor arrived, see how the overnight crew wound down, how equipment got handed off. He pushed through the swinging door into the receiving bay. Concrete floor, stained dark, with years of forklift oil, fluorescent lights humming overhead, pallets stacked 12 feet high in every direction. He didn't get far. The supervisor's office door swung open behind him, and Brody Duskin walked out, travel mug of gas station coffee in one hand, radio clipped to his belt. Cody Munn trailed a step behind him. Same navy polo, same walk. Duskin clocked Malik immediately. A big black man in a beat-up jacket, no badge, no lanyard, standing in the middle of his dock like he had somewhere to be. You have to understand something about Brody Duskin. In his head, this dock belonged to him. Not on paper. He knew whose name was on the deed, but in every way that mattered to a man like him. He decided who was welcome on his floor. He decided who wasn't, and he'd already made his mind about Malik before Malik said a single word. "Who let you back here?" Malik turned to face him, calm, steady. "I'm here for the operations walkthrough. I have clearance." Duskin looked at Munn. Munn smirked. Duskin looked back at Malik. "Clearance." He repeated it like the word offended him personally. "You got a badge, a name on the schedule? Or you just wandered in off the street looking for the day labor pickup, because that's 2 blocks down?" Behind the glass of the supervisor's office, a scheduling clerk named Doris. No relation to the gate guard. A coincidence nobody in the building had ever bothered to sort out, glanced up from her monitor, and then back down, quickly, deliberately. She'd worked under Duskin for 6 years. She knew better than to watch too closely. A young forklift operator named Jasmine Reed had just clocked out from the overnight shift. She was standing near the time clock, bag over her shoulder, close enough to hear everything. She'd seen Duskin go after people before. Never quite like this, but close. Something in her gut told her to pull her phone out of her back pocket. She didn't hold it up, she just angled it, screen tilted outward, and pressed record. Malik held his ground. I have every right to be in this building. That was the moment. Everything shifted. It wasn't the words. It was the refusal. Duskin was used to people backing down, mumbling an apology, shuffling toward the exit, disappearing before things got worse. That's how it always went. Malik didn't move, and he didn't look away. Duskin's jaw tightened. He stepped in close, the kind of close that isn't about talking. It's about making somebody feel small in their own space. He grabbed a fistful of Malik's jacket collar and shoved him backward, hard, into the steel shelving unit behind him. 3 cases of bottled water toppled off the second shelf and burst open on the concrete. Get your ass out of my dock before I have you arrested for trespassing. He leaned in close enough that only Malik could hear the next part. Guys like you always think you can just walk in somewhere and act like you own it. You don't own a damn thing here. Jasmine's phone caught all of it. The shove, the crash of the water cases, and, because her phone was 6 feet closer than anyone realized, the low, ugly comment Duskin muttered under his breath. The one that had nothing to do with trespassing and everything to do with what he assumed about a black man in work clothes, standing where he didn't expect one to stand. Malik straightened his jacket. He didn't rub his shoulder where it had hit the shelf, even though it already ached. He looked at Duskin for 3 full seconds, 3 seconds of silence that said more than any sentence could have. Then he turned and walked out through the dock door. Duskin watched him go, took a sip of his coffee, and turned to Munn. Let's get the floor moving. That was the whole event from Duskin's side of it. A nobody who wandered in and got handled. No incident report. No mention to Holloway. Just another Tuesday. When Duskin walked back into the break room 20 minutes later, he told the story loud enough for 6 people to hear. Some guy wandered onto the dock this morning. No badge, no nothing. Had to remind him whose building this is. Munn added, guy had an attitude on him too, like he was somebody. A couple of laughs. Easy, comfortable laughs, the kind that come from a room where nobody questions anything. One person didn't laugh. Anthony Vance, a dock lead who'd worked at Ironbridge for 8 years, sat at the corner table with his coffee going cold in his hand. He'd seen Duskin do this before, not exactly this, but close enough. And every time, he'd done exactly what he was doing right now. Nothing. Because speaking up at Ironbridge didn't get you heard. It got you out-targeted. But something about the way this one landed sat differently in his chest. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Malik sat in his truck with both hands on the wheel. His shoulder throbbed where it had hit the shelf. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror, didn't see much visible damage, just a slight redness along his collarbone where the fabric had scraped skin. He didn't call anyone right away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small notepad he always kept in his inner pocket out of habit from his investigations days, and started writing. Time. Supervisors, approximate age and build, exact words used. Names he'd caught on name tags. Every detail, clinical and precise, the way he'd written up 100 incident reports for other people over the years. This time, he was writing his own. He picked up his phone and called one number. It rang twice. Diane, I've seen enough. 6 words. Then he hung up. Diane had told him to observe for a full week before making any moves. Malik didn't need a week, he barely needed 4 minutes. But here's the question worth sitting with. Malik told Diane he'd seen enough on day 1. The announcement of his appointment was to stay quiet for another 10 days. So what happens when he moves it up? What happens when an entire dock crew that just watched their supervisor shove a man into a shelving unit finds out exactly who that man really is? Malik didn't go back to the motel to rest. He went back to work. He photographed the faint bruising along his collarbone from 3 angles, noting the time and lighting on each shot the way he'd trained investigators to do years earlier. He sat at the small motel desk, pulled out a legal pad, and wrote a full incident report. Supervisor's name read off the tag on his polo, the exact sequence of events, every word he could remember. He wrote it in the flat, factual language of someone who'd filled out hundreds of these reports for other people. This time it was his own name on the complainant line. Then he called Diane back. She picked up on the first ring, already tense. "Tell me everything," he told her. "No embellishment. What was said? What was done? Who else was in the room?" When he got to the shove into the shelving unit, she went quiet for a long moment. "I want him gone by tonight." "No." Malik said it fast, firm. "Diane, don't move yet. This is exactly what you sent me here to find, and I found it in 4 minutes. If we pull him now with nothing but my word, it looks reactive. We do this by the book, or it won't hold." "Then what do you want?" "Move the announcement up. Full facility assembly, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Every person on every shift in one room." Diane agreed. She didn't like waiting, but she trusted Malik, which was exactly why she'd hired him. Back at Ironbridge, nothing happened that afternoon. No incident report was filed. Not by Duskin, not by Munn, not by the scheduling clerk who'd seen the whole thing through the glass. In the official record of the Millbrook Distribution Center, that morning on the dock simply hadn't occurred. It would have stayed that way, too, because the dock's overhead cameras ran on a 72-hour loop. In 3 days, the footage would be gone, recorded over, wiped clean. Dennis Holloway had known about that loop policy for years. It wasn't an oversight. It was a feature he'd relied on more than once. That evening, Jasmine Reed sat in her car in the employee lot for a long time before she drove home. She didn't post the video anywhere. She didn't know what she was going to do with it yet. She just knew she wanted proof to exist somewhere that wasn't going to conveniently disappear. At the same time, Anthony Vance sat at his kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at a group text with 2 other dock leads he trusted. He typed a message, deleted it, typed it again. "Something happened this morning. I think it's finally going to catch up with him. He didn't send it. Not yet." Brody Duskin, for his part, went home, cracked a beer, and put the game on. His wife asked how his day was. "Same old," he said, not looking up. "Had to deal with some guy trying to walk onto the dock like he owned the place." She didn't press. He finished his beer, went to bed early, and slept fine. That's the part that should sit uneasy with anyone hearing this. He'd put his hands on a man hard enough to knock cases off a shelf, and he slept like it was nothing. Back at the motel, Malik wasn't sleeping either. He was pressing a clean dress shirt on the ironing board the front desk had lent him, laying out the navy blazer with the small Ironbridge pin Diane had mailed him the week before. He set the appointment letter, his handwritten notes, and the photographs of his chauffeur side by side inside a leather portfolio he'd carried through every investigation of his career. He called Maya one more time. "Dad, did something happen today?" He paused. "Something happened. Tomorrow, something bigger is going to happen." At 6 a.m. the next morning, an email landed in every Ironbridge Millbrook inbox from the office of the COO. Subject line: mandatory, facility-wide meeting, 7 a.m., all shifts, no exceptions. Duskin read it in the break room, shrugged. "Probably another safety seminar." Munn laughed along with him. Holloway read the same email sent as his office. He didn't laugh. Corporate never came down to Millbrook directly. Something in his gut told him this wasn't a seminar. He was right. By 6:55, the largest open floor space in the warehouse, usually reserved for patent staging, had been cleared and filled with folding chairs. 90-some employees packed in across 3 shifts, dock crews, drivers, office staff, all of them dragged out of bed or held over from overnight runs. The room buzzed with theories. Layoffs, a merger, another lecture from someone in a suit who'd never touched a pallet jack. Duskin sat near the front with Munn beside him, legs stretched out, arms crossed like a man who owned his chair. Holloway stood near the back wall, arms folded, watching the door. Anthony Vance sat off to one side, hands in his lap, phone with Jasmine's video still saved to it sitting heavy in his jacket pocket. At 7:02, the side door opened, and Diane Castellano walked in, two members of her executive team behind her. No smile, no small talk. She walked straight to a podium set up at the front, set down a folder, and looked out over the room. The conversations died, row by row, like a wave pulling back from shore. "Thank you all for being here. I'll keep this brief." Her voice was even, official. As most of you know, Milton Cray has retired. This facility has operated without a permanent plant manager for 3 months. That ends today. A few chairs creaked. Someone in the back whispered, "After a national search, I've selected a new operations leader for this facility. This individual brings 22 years of distinguished logistics and supply chain experience, including direct work investigating workplace conduct and labor practices at 2 major national retailers." Duskin was already half checking his phone under his knee. Munn nudged him. He glanced up, mildly interested. "This facility has lost the trust of the workforce that keeps it running. Complaints are documented. Injury and turnover numbers are documented. The reputation of this site is at a breaking point. The person I've chosen was selected specifically because they have the experience, the independence, and the backbone to lead this facility through what comes next." The word backbone hung in the air. A few people sat up straighter. Holloway's jaw tightened. "Please welcome your new Vice President of Operations for the Millbrook facility, Malik Sterling." A door at the side of the room opened, and Malik walked in. But this wasn't the man from the dock. Not the man in the worn canvas jacket. No badge, shoved into a shelving unit and told he didn't own a damn thing. This was someone else entirely. Navy blazer, company pin catching the overhead light, a leather portfolio in his left hand, posture straight, expression calm and completely unreadable. He walked down the center aisle at an unhurried pace. 90 people watched him in dead silence. He passed Duskin's row. Duskin saw him. For half a second, it was just a face, vaguely familiar, and then it hit him all at once, like the floor had dropped out from under his chair. His mouth opened slightly. His hand went white around the arm of the folding chair. He turned to Munn. Munn had already gone pale. Their eyes met, and in that single look they both understood exactly what had happened. That was him, the man from the dock. The man Duskin had shoved into a shelving unit and told to get his ass out of the building. And he was walking to the front of the room to be introduced as the new head of the entire facility. Duskin didn't breathe. Malik reached the podium, gave Diane a single nod, and turned to face the room. "I'm not here to make friends," he said. "I'm here because this facility has lost the trust of the people who show up here every single day and do the work. My job is to rebuild that trust from the ground floor up." He let the silence sit for a moment. "I've already seen firsthand how some of you operate when you think nobody with any authority is watching." He didn't look at Duskin. He didn't need to. Every person in that room felt the weight of the sentence land. And Duskin felt it hardest of all. Starting today, every complaint gets reviewed. Every incident involving physical conduct gets documented and investigated. Every interaction on this floor, with coworkers, with visitors, with anyone who walks through that door, reflects the standard this company is going to hold itself to. Nobody clapped. The silence was thick enough to choke on. But on the far side of the room, Anthony Vance sat up a little straighter. And for the first time in 8 years, something that looked a lot like hope crossed his face. After the assembly broke up, Malik went straight to the small office that had been Milton Cray's, closed the door, and set the portfolio on the desk. Appointment letter, handwritten notes, photographs of the bruising on his shoulder. He laid them side by side, picked up the desk phone, and dialed a number he'd saved before he'd ever set foot in Millbrook. "Renee, it's Malik. I need you to open a formal investigation. Sending everything to you now." In the hallway, Duskin grabbed Munz's arm, voice barely above a whisper and cracking at the edges. "That was him. That was the guy from the dock." "I know," Munn said. "Does he know it was me?" "He was standing right there, Brody. He knows." Duskin's face ran through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Panic, denial, then something colder. "We need to find Holloway. Now." Malik's first official act wasn't a memo or a meet and greet with his new senior staff. It was a preservation order. Within an hour of the assembly, he'd signed a facility-wide hold on every security camera feed for the past 72 hours. No overrides, no deletions. He'd read the 72-hour loops policy in the operations manual before he'd ever walked through the door, and he knew exactly how little time was left before that morning's footage disappeared for good. The order landed on Holloway's desk before lunch. He read it twice, then walked to Malik's office and knocked once. "Sir, is a full hold really necessary? Storage costs alone." "It's necessary," Malik said without looking up. "With respect, we've never done a blanket hold before. It's going to raise questions on the floor." Malik looked up then. "Is there a reason you'd rather I hadn't preserved it?" Holloway didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed. He stood there 3 seconds too long, turned, and walked out. The next morning, Renee Castillo arrived from corporate HR investigations. 20 years of experience, no ties to Millbrook, no favors owed to anyone in the building. Malik had worked with her on a case years earlier that had ended with 2 managers terminated and a regional director forced into early retirement. He trusted her completely, and more importantly, he trusted her to be independent. They met behind a closed door. Malik handed over the portfolio, his notes, the photographs, the timeline he'd written the night before. Renee read through it without speaking, then looked up. "You're the complainant and a witness. That means you're out of the investigation itself." "That's exactly why you're here," Malik said. "This is your case. I won't review your findings until they're final. Whatever you find, you report to me and Diane at the same time." Renee nodded. "I'll need camera access. Already preserved. IT will have it ready this afternoon." "Witnesses?" "At least 4 people were on that dock floor. Start with the footage, confirm faces, then track them down." She started that afternoon. The dock camera showed exactly what Malik had described. The confrontation, the shove, the water cases hitting the floor, Malik walking out, Duskin walking back inside like nothing had happened. But the camera had no audio. The comment Duskin had muttered under his breath needed a different source. Renee found it through the time clock sign-in log. Jasmine Reed had badged out at 5:56 that morning, 7 minutes after the incident. One phone call, one visit to her apartment, and Jasmine handed over her phone without hesitation. "Take it, whatever you need. I didn't know if anyone would even care." "I care," Renee told her. "That's why I'm here." The audio was clear enough to use. Duskin's opening line, the shove, the crash, and underneath it, low and vicious, the comment about guys like you that turned an aggressive shove into something with an uglier motive behind it. Then Anthony Vance came forward on his own, requesting a private meeting through the formal HR channel. He sat across from Renee, hands folded, and started talking. "I've been here 8 years. I've seen Asiskin do this before. Not always physical, but close. The way he talks to certain guys on the floor, the way he decides who gets the good routes and who doesn't. What happened yesterday was the worst I've personally seen." He described 2 prior incidents he'd witnessed and one he'd only heard about secondhand, gave approximate dates, named names. Every time, it just disappeared. Nothing ever got written up. "I finally understand why." "Why now?" Renee asked. "Because somebody finally walked in here who might actually do something about it." Renee moved to Duskin next. He arrived with a union rep who'd clearly coached him beforehand. Deny, minimize, redirect. Duskin's opening statement was calm, rehearsed. "I was responding to an unidentified individual in a restricted area. He wouldn't identify himself. I used the minimum contact necessary to move him along." Renee let him finish. Then she played the dock camera footage. Duskin watched himself on the screen and didn't flinch. "Like I said, minimum contact necessary. Minimum contact necessary includes knocking 3 cases off a shelf?" "That was incidental." Incidental. Renee repeated the word slowly, like she was testing whether it would hold any weight. Then she played Jasmine's audio. The room went quiet. Duskin heard his own voice. The comment about the day labor pickup, the shove, and underneath it, the line about guys like you that stripped away any argument that this had been about procedure. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. "Would you like to revise your statement, Mr. Duskin?" He said nothing for the rest of the interview. Munn's interview came next, without Duskin in the room, and he was a different person entirely. Smaller, quieter, less sure of himself. He started with the same script. I was backing up my supervisor. Renee laid out the evidence and then said the thing that cracked him open. Under company policy, failing to intervene during an act of physical aggression carries the same disciplinary weight as committing it. You were standing 5 feet away. You saw the shove. You heard what he said. And you laughed along with the story afterward. That makes you complicit. Munn asked for a break. When he came back, he told the truth, confirmed Shavda was deliberate, confirmed the comment, and added something Renee hadn't expected. I should have said something. I've known for a while this wasn't right. I just never wanted to be the guy who said it. The last piece was Holloway. Renee pulled his supervisory file going back 5 years. The pattern was almost too clean to be coincidence. Every complaint against Duskin, all 4 of them, routed through Holloway's desk, closed within days, minimal documentation, no follow-up interviews. Then she talked to Doris, the scheduling clerk, who'd seen the whole thing through the glass and confirmed what Anthony had described. Duskin had done this before, not this bad, but before, and Holloway always made it disappear. The morning it happened, Doris added, almost as an afterthought. Milton Cray was supposed to be here to walk the new hire in personally. He's always in by 5:30. That day he didn't show until almost 8. Renee pulled Holloway's phone records and found a text sent to Milton Cray the night before, at 11:42 p.m. Don't rush in tomorrow. I'll cover the early handoff. Cray had been the only person at Ironbridge who knew Malik was coming, and Holloway had made sure he wasn't there to recognize him. Renee couldn't prove Holloway had known exactly who Malik was, but she could prove he deliberately kept the one person who might have identified him away from the building that morning. Whether that was sabotage or an extraordinary coincidence, the text made the answer fairly clear. The disciplinary hearing was held 9 days later, in a small conference room on the 2nd floor. No cameras, no audience. Malik sat at the head of the table, not as the man who'd been shoved into a shelving unit, but as the vice president with the authority to decide what came next. Diane sat to his right. Renee sat to his left with the case file open in front of her. Duskin was brought in first, wearing his uniform polo for the last time, though he didn't know that yet. Renee played both pieces of footage one final time. The dock camera, then Jasmine's audio. The sound of the shove, and underneath it, the comment, filled the small room louder than it ever had on the open floor. His union rep argued for a suspension with retraining, used phrases like isolated incident and 9 years of dedicated service. The words landed on the table and nobody picked them up. Malik let him finish, then spoke. Mr. Duskin, based on the sustained findings of this investigation, physical aggression against an individual, documented discriminatory remarks, failure to report the incident, and conduct unworthy of your position. You're terminated from Ironbridge Freight and Logistics, effective immediately. This file will be forwarded to corporate legal for review, and to the county for consideration of any applicable charges. Duskin sat still for 10 full seconds. Then he unclipped his ID badge, set it on the table without a word, and walked out. Holloway came next. Renee laid out 5 years of buried complaints, the pattern, the text message to Milton Cray. He didn't argue. He sat there like a man watching his own house burn down from across the street. Malik stripped him of his supervisory title, suspended him without pay, and ordered every complaint he'd supervised in the last 5 years reopened for independent review. Munn was last, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Renee noted his cooperation, his willingness to break from Duskin's account. Malik looked at him for a long moment before speaking. You're suspended for 45 days without pay. When you return, you'll complete a full retraining program and serve an 18-month probation. Any sustained complaint during that window ends your employment here. He paused. You had a choice on that dock floor. You saw what was happening, and you laughed along with it afterward. That doesn't disappear because you told the truth once, someone finally asked. Another pause. But I'm giving you something Duskin didn't earn. A second chance. Don't waste it. Munn nodded, eyes down, and mumbled an apology on his way out that cracked halfway through. The hearing was over in under 2 hours. 3 careers, one ended, one dismantled, one hanging by a thread, and the man who'd made it happen was the same man who'd been shoved into a shelving unit 9 days earlier. But firing people was only half the job. Within 2 weeks, Malik rolled out a full set of reforms: mandatory body cameras for all dock supervisors, an independent complaint review line that bypassed the local chain of command entirely, a new use of force and physical contact policy requiring same-day documentation, and outside-led conduct training for every supervisor in the building. The Corporate Compliance Office, which had been monitoring Millbrook since the second OSHA flag, noted the changes in its next quarterly review. For the first time in 3 years, the report didn't use the word deficient. Complaints didn't stop. They never do. But the kind of complaints changed, fewer about intimidation, more about process. That was progress, slow and unglamorous, but real. Jasmine Reed received a formal note from the facility thanking her for coming forward. She kept it folded in her locker. 6 months later, the dock floor looked the same stained concrete, same fluorescent hum. But it didn't feel the same. There was a new suggestion box by the time clock that people actually used. Supervisors greeted workers by name walking in, not because a policy told them to, but because ignoring someone had started to feel wrong. Anthony Vance got promoted to shift supervisor. Malik pinned the new badge to his shirt himself, in the same room where he'd been introduced 9 months earlier. "I spent 8 years staying quiet," Anthony told him. "I don't want anyone else on this floor to feel like they have to." "Then make sure they don't," Malik said. At the end of a long day, Malik sat alone in his office, opened the leather portfolio one more time. The appointment letter was still inside. Beside it now was something new. A photo from a company picnic, workers and management standing around the same grill, laughing. Nobody performing for anybody. He closed the folder, put on his jacket, and walked out through the dock entrance, the same door he'd been shoved through 9 months before. He stopped for a second by the shelving unit, looked at the spot on the concrete where the water cases had shattered. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel triumph either. He felt something quieter, something closer to proof that the worst morning of his career had turned into the first morning of something better. Have you ever been judged before anyone gave you the chance to say a word? Have you ever watched something wrong happen right in front of you and told yourself it wasn't your place to speak? Because somewhere on a dock floor tonight, in a break room, in an office, nobody thinks to check. The same choice is sitting in front of the ultimates. The only question is what they'll do with it.